this story just points to the fact that Hanley's success was actually seeming to catch up with him. You see, at this time in the yachting world, there was a real move toward away from this old school of designing boats that Hanley was accustomed to, his rule of thumb design. And there were newer designers coming in, younger designers that had this scientific approach to building boats. They would do mathematical calculations and draw their boats down on paper. So it may have been some type of conspiracy or at least some jealousy on the part of these new designers that led to this ruling against Hanley. And it seems to me there was probably a sentiment to get rid of this guy out of the yacht design business, because even though he had these old techniques, he was still beating everything on the water. And then another tragedy hit. He lost out on a design contest to BB Crown and Shield to build a Challenger for the 1901 America's Cup. Hanley came up with a 90-foot by 36-foot beam centerboard boat. That would have been very impressive to see race against some of these big boats. He would later say that this was the chance of his lifetime. Now, you America's Cup aficionados in the audience will probably know that the Crown and Shield boat named Independence ends up, of course, losing out to the Herreshoff Columbia, which goes on to win the Cup that year. Then another fire in his boat shop in Quincy, and a partnership gone bad, actually leaves Hanley almost penniless. He was really down on his luck for a time in the early 1900s. But if nothing else, Hanley was a tough nut, and he went back at it, scraping things together as he could, and slowly building back up a business. He got back into building a few boats here and there, but the rest of his career was mainly focused on maintenance and repair until he retired well into his 70s. So it was at this later time in his life that some plans were drawn of a Hanley cat, intended to be built for a fellow in South Africa. Now, of course, Hanley himself didn't draw the plans. He wouldn't know how. The original prints, now located at the Quincy Historical Society, were penned by a Swede named Erland Diebs. And for the longest time, I thought this Diebs character may have been swindling Hanley out of his genius and drawing up these plans. But I've just recently uncovered that Diebs was actually the main sheet man aboard Almira for so many years while she sailed in Quincy Bay. So it was likely that Diebs was probably a friend of Hanley and was interested in keeping the lines and these designs alive for future generations. So fast forward to 2003, and the plans were published in a 1917 Rudder magazine article that I stumble upon, and of course, you can guess, set into motion building of Kathleen. I actually remember vividly driving home that night after finding this article and just giddy with excitement at the thought of even possibly recreating one of these boats that I'd been reading about. So the only question left was who would actually build this boat? Now, I grew up sailing Beetle cats, and I turned to a familiar entity to have the boat built. It was Beetle. The Beetle Cat Shop was then in transition from their property on Smith Neck Road to a larger facility in Wareham, where they're still located. So in the summer of 2004, the lumber arrives. Brad Ives had imported a shipload of lumber from sustainably harvested forests in Suriname, South Africa. Brad at that time was working mainly with Gannon and Benjamin, but luckily for me, he was storing a lot of the wood on the mainland at my uncle's sawmill. So we were able to go over and cull through the piles and pick out the best lumber for building Kathleen. There's some construction pictures here. Here we are taking some patterns off of the lofting. The nails on edge are used to do that. A picture of the stem being carved. Here are the two boat builders that were involved in building the boat. On the left is John O'Donovan, who now has his own shop up in Maine. And on the right, Beetle Bill Sauerbray. He's in the audience tonight. Bill, you might remember, was here last spring to talk about the exquisite reproduction of the Herreshoff Alarian that was built at Beetle, probably the most significant and historically accurate reproduction of an Alarian to date. Some more pictures of the construction. This is the centerboard case getting put together very carefully, as catboats tend to eventually leak there. And here's a look. The boat starts coming together. The planking lines are figured out. And this is how the frames in the boat are steam bent, 2-inch by 2-inch oak frames. This is the compression bending jig that was used. And at this point, I just wanted to mention that there was a concept as we built the boat that probably Bill was the instigator for. He brought into the project this mindset that today a lot of the techniques, boat building techniques that Hanley would have used and the Crosbys would have used building the catboats back then have been lost, have been forgotten. And we really didn't want to reinvent the wheel. You know, the philosophy was that these guys were much better at building the boats than we were today. And trying to re-engineer the same problem probably would have resulted in failure. So the mindset was to research as much as possible how the boats were built. And actually that has translated into how I learned how to sail the boat, is try and research as much as possible how the boats were built. The boats are probably fine, but we just need to figure out how to sail them. And, here's some pictures of how the frames are set into the keel on the boat. There's a half dovetail joint. And what you're looking at here is a socket where the end of the frame is going to attach into the keel. And then there's a rabbet cut for the garboard. The little stick in the picture is just a reference to take the angle off of the half dovetail. And then you pull that stick out and you go mark the end of your frame. Take your frame over to the bandsaw and cut off that half dovetail. You fill the socket with white lead. Then you bring your frame in, slide it in, and then a soft wooden wedge is placed in to hold the frame in place. It looks pretty quick in the slideshow, but Bill and John had to do a lot of these frames. Yeah, at this point the boat's really looking like a piece of artwork, and actually it's almost a shame to start planking her up and covering over all of these. But the planks go on, and the interior work is done before the deck goes on. Here's the strip plank deck being put in. And here's one of the early shots of her painted up, looking good in the shop. And at this point you might guess that we didn't use any Dynel or plywood or any modern materials. Here the canvas is being set in a rubberized paint on top of a cypress cabin top. And then it was time to look for some spars. I ended up searching around in the town forest in Falmouth, picked out a couple of nice sticks, and not soon after Brownell shows up with them ready to put into the boat. So now it's July 2006. We've spent 2 years building the boat, and it's finally time to see if she works. There's a lot of trepidation. Were the historical accounts accurate? Was Hanley's genius? Was it real? No one had sailed one of these boats. There are no first-hand accounts anymore of sailing one of these boats. And there were a lot of skeptics that said, "Well, that sail is too big. You'll never survive the first jibe." Um, so here my brother and I maneuver her into place the morning of that first sail, wondering if we're going to get our heads chopped off. And here we are moments after bearing away from the mooring for the first time with the real Kathleen looking on as I smile from ear to ear. It turns out she did go, she didn't sink or fall apart, and we did survive the first jibe. On the shakedown cruise out to Cuttyhunk and throughout the first season, as anticipated, there were some things to improve with the, but not with the boat. We needed to have better sailing technique. There was actually nothing wrong with the boat, or next to nothing. We recut the sail the first year and trimmed the traveler bar, lowered the traveler bar just a little bit for aesthetics. But otherwise everything was working just fine. That's not to say she was easy to sail, but that wasn't part of the plan. I actually didn't want a boat that would immediately be easy to sail when we stepped in for the first time. I was and still am planning to have the boat for a long time, and I surely didn't want to get bored. I was shooting for it to take about 10 years in order to become proficient at sailing her, and maybe another 10 to really master her. So everything was actually kind of working. She's been sailing now for, this past summer was her 6th season, and so we're about 60% of the way there to becoming proficient at handling her, and we are actually right on target. But since that first sail, we've had a lot of fun learning how to sail her.